We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Thank you for 100 subscribers. I love every single one of you. Enjoy this chunky leftist comp that I made just for y'all. Stay radical.
In light of recent events at the Capitol, I figured this was a applicable song to share. I'm neighbors with a Nazi, he lives next door, and I'm quite tempted to start a neighborhood war. And he doesn't try to hide, cause he thinks I share white pride, And so then we started talking about current news. And so now I'm talking politics with a Nazi by the trash can talk, and he's telling me everything that he can't stand. And he says those equal rights, they trigger my fight or flight. And so I said, you're a fucking piece of shit. And he didn't like that very much, and so now I'm getting stabbed by a Nazi by the garbage. And while he's paying Hitler his due homage, he wipes off my blood and says to Brotherhood, we're the biggest, happiest family that you know.
Let me throw something in your face. Boom. A black woman drove to D.C. from Connecticut with her baby daughter. A U-point at a checkpoint led to her being killed in a slew of unanswered questions. She was shot 5 times and killed by the U.S. Capitol Police. Her 13-month-old daughter in the backseat. But y'all are bold enough to break down the fence. Bold enough to get inside. Bold enough to pose with a statue. Bold enough to take a seat. Bold enough to kick your feet up. And what is the response to this boldness? A selfie. But yet Miss Carey was killed with her daughter in the back seat for a U-turn, not even on the steps on the inside. I guess she was bold enough to not follow traffic laws. Bold enough to be black.
My unwhitewashing of history continues. We're going to call this episode American Slavery. I see a lot of people using this picture, and they don't even acknowledge that this man had a name. His name was Peter, and this picture was taken circa 1863 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The first slave ship to arrive in this country was the White Lion in 1619. You see, this country was founded on the principles of white supremacy, and the founders had no problem, or were they ashamed of that. You see, there were hundreds of laws governing the ownership of black people. Everything from 1662, where they said that a child born of a black woman, no matter the status of the father, was a slave. To 1667, where they said converting to Christianity did not save you from slavery. There were laws that allowed you to be killed if you were a slave for resisting authority. Does that sound familiar? 40 signers of the Declaration of Independence owned slaves, and 10 of the first 12 presidents.
Piece of information that you learned that feels illegal to know.
I studied physics in college, and one day we learned about Faraday cages, which are metal structures that block radio frequency signals. And I thought, don't stores put RFID tags on things that are expensive? And if you walk through the door, the alarm goes off? Well, all you gotta do is use a Faraday cage, like a piece of aluminum foil. Wrap the foil around the tag, and now the alarm doesn't go off.
What's something that's clearly a scam but Americans have been conditioned to believe is normal?
Sex trafficking in the ring of foster care. 21% of kids that enter foster care are African American. 20% are Hispanic. In the year of 2018, 425,000 kids went missing. 37% of that population were African American. It's hard to label the percentage of Hispanic because the FBI labeled them with the white kids, but approximately 20% were Hispanic. So just about the same percentage that enter foster care also go missing. 52% of kids that are picked up for sex trafficking are African American or Hispanic. 80 to 90% of those kids have admitted to being in foster care. 53,000 cases a year are closed because they are labeled as runaways. 61,000 cases a year are closed because they are labeled as missing. No one's looking for these kids, and the numbers are too close to be a coincidence. Like, people need to pay attention to this. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all.
And welcome back to Unlearning Christianity, Unlearning Christian Homophobia. This is part 11 in our series, and I want to talk with you about 1 Corinthians 6, verse 9. In this passage, Paul talks about certain people who aren't going to enter into the kingdom of God, and he uses two Greek words that are under question here, malakoi and arsenikotai. Malakoi means soft, generally thought of as the person who takes the passive role in this relationship. Arsenikotai means man bed, and it generally thought of as the person who takes the active role in this relationship. Christian homophobia will say, there you go, God is against homosexuality. J. Paul Sampley is a New Testament scholar and Greek historian, and he says that if you don't understand Greek history, you might think this is against homosexuality. But if you do know Greek history, you will know that Paul is talking about heterosexual men married to women who keep slave boys in their house as sex objects. This is not about two men or two women living in a same-sex committed relationship. This is about sex, slavery, and rape.
What is a random historical fact that you just absolutely think is the funniest thing in the world?
The modern depiction of Jesus as white was popularized by Leonardo da Vinci when Da Vinci painted him. And Da Vinci actually modeled Jesus in his paintings after his gay lover at the time. So homophobic, racist Christians, that version of Jesus that you use to uphold your hatred, that's an Italian twink.
Asians are people of color. They do not remotely look like they are of European descent. Let's not get into the oppression and the discrimination and the stereotypes that they face on a day-to-day basis. Matter of fact, I think karma should handle this one, so I'm a tag.
Obviously, she is right. But let me tell you all a story. In the early 1900s, there was a white man that went to court to discuss the meaning of what it means to be white. And of course, this immediately sparked attention throughout the United States. There was a Japanese man that went to court to see if he qualified for being Asian because of the racial discrimination that he went through. And of course, he did not qualify because the court said you have yellow skin and you have slanted eyes. You are not what a white person should look like. Ever since the early 1800s up until now, Asians has went through so much racial discrimination, stereotypes, and propaganda, with America appropriating their looks and culture. Put Japanese people in camps, put Filipinos in zoo cages. Many Asians go through racism when growing up. Asians are Asian. They are their own race. They are people of color and they are far from being white.
The original design for the Statue of Liberty was a black female. As a matter of fact, in a museum in New York, you can see the original design of the Statue of Liberty, which is a black woman.
When the French artist created the Statue of Liberty, it was supposed to represent the end of slavery. On the original model, there were chains on the hands and feet, as we know. When the statue got to America, they wanted to erase any references to slavery from the statue, but the artist really fought to keep the chains on there because this is your art. You don't want people tampering with your art. And if you look, the chain is still on the foot of the Statue of Liberty to this day.
Black stereotypes and what they're grounded in. Part 13. Black people love Kool-Aid. Kool-Aid was invented in 1927 by Edward Perkins in Nebraska. It didn't become associated with the black community until around the 50s and 60s when the marketing started being geared towards poor income communities. Segregation and the mass pulling out of white businesses in black communities, the black communities started becoming the poorer communities. Kool-Aid became kind of a rallying around point. It was cheap, it was good, and kids loved it. In 2011, Kraft, the company that owns Kool-Aid, started allocating their funds into exclusively branding towards Latinx communities and black communities. According to the brand, over 40% of the consumers are black Americans, and 20% of that are Latinx communities. Rooted in any overt racism, however, it became race-based when people would just assume black people would drink this because they could.
All right, welcome to the episode of things you learned about in school, but didn't. And this one's insane. Like, I know it's in a lot of stuff is insane, but this is insane. So the late 1800s, early 1900s, there's a thing called the Eugenics movement. Basically, that was a movement centered around cleansing the American population of bad traits. So to do that, they would make people with good traits breed together. This meant people with the right skin color, right height, and right level of intelligence. But then the scientists were like, okay, it's not enough to just have them breed together. We need to get rid of the other ones. So they're like, let's sterilize women who are imbeciles or feeble-minded, involuntarily. This mainly targeted mentally ill women and women who are in the lower class because you're lower class, you can't afford great education, therefore you're not intelligent. So in 1924, Virginia decides to pass a law on this involuntary sterilization. And they decided to test on this woman named Carey Buck. I'm making a part 2 because there's so much shit and I need more time. So Carey's mom gave her up to adoption when she was 4. Then her mom was admitted into a mental hospital. Then she was adopted into a poor family, so her education wasn't the best. Remember that part. Then when she was 16, she was raped and impregnated by the nephew of said family. And when she tried to tell, the family basically said she was feeble-minded and not intelligent enough to be trusted, and so she was put into an institution. So with all this being public information, the state of Virginia was like, hey, let's test the sterilization thing out on her. Now, of course, she tries to plead her case, and this case makes it all the way to the Supreme Court. And the man who was the deciding factor in the case had never even met her. He was going over transcripts he had gotten over time. So in 1927, Carey Buck was sterilized. And then by 1930, 24 other states had adopted the sterilization laws. And this law wasn't finally done until 1972. You know what happened during all that time? World War II. Now, I'm not going to say that this inspired, but it starts with a hit and ends with a lure.
That's what Black Lives Matter funding is. So imagine if you're like a black person in a black neighborhood and you find out these statistics, so you go and peacefully protest, and for 50 years you and your people peacefully protest and the government does absolutely nothing. So for 50 years you follow all the rules, you peacefully protest, you ask the politicians to pass laws to make this racism go away. For 50 years they do nothing. What would you do at that point if for 50 years you're peacefully protesting and nothing happens?
Honestly, I don't really know.
You know what I mean?
But
dear white people, this is just a quick one from management. When you come out here and do some racist shit, or go outside in the world and do some racist shit, and black people drag you for doing some racist shit, please stop coming back as a victim, telling us that instead of cussing your ass out, that we should educate you. Black people did not create racism. We did not create the color spectrum so that we could easily segregate ourselves from other racial groups and create this fake ass supremacy. That the fuck was you. Meaning that the only person who have the answers in which you are looking for is you. Black people can only educate you on how it affects us. Also, please note that libraries exist, meaning that you can do your own research. The words colored, nigger, and blacks will never be normalized by black people. We will never allow white people to freely say that shit to us. You know what we really should normalize, white people? Using wash rag, soap, washing our legs, seasoning and washing meat, not letting dogs lick us in the mouth, and most importantly, stop using dried shampoo. Good night.
Let's talk about generalizations and how they have been one of the most effective tools used by societal and political movements. Hot take, I'm ready. Generalizations are used by the oppressed to create the shock value needed for the oppressors to listen to them. And when I say that, that includes examples of intersectionality as well. Hear me out. If I said some white people are racist, everyone would be like, way to state the obvious, monkey. That statement was completely true, but it does nothing. Now imagine if I said this. All white people are born racist. Everyone would be sitting like this. Hey, hold on now. Now, whether or not you agree with that statement or not, you're listening now. I saw a post saying all cops are bad, and then I saw someone in the comments saying, well, this is a bold claim. Ding, that's the point. One of the most recent examples of how this manifests in intersectionality is the black man or the weakest link trend. I'm not even about to hold you. When I first heard it, I was shocked for a second. Like, what do you mean by weakest link? Like, what does that mean? That shock that I had is exactly what it's supposed to do. It made me stop scrolling. It made me pause and research. And then in the end, I understand the claim. We spend a lot of time dwelling on the literal words of these phrases and fail to think about where they're coming from.
Still fucking arguing about this. We were more advanced than you colonizers. Oh yeah? How do you figure that? We had such a complex culture and socio-economic system that Rome would have been fucking envious. Oh yeah? What do you have that we don't? Better understanding of war tactics, better road system, more stable socioeconomic system, better understanding of human anatomy. Oh yeah? Well, we got beer. Huh, bitch. We had chocolate and gold. Fuck you. Well, we have horses. Yeah, horses. Yep, and then we took your horses and became better riders than you ever could have been. Checkmate, bitch. Well, y'all still lost. If we had had even one disease that you weren't familiar with, we would have wiped out the whole of Europe. Fuck you.
Welcome back to episode 3 of Smoke Sesh with a Commie. If you're new here, this is a series where I explain basic concepts and principles of communism. I tend to oversimplify for educational purposes, so if that's going to piss you off, just scroll. Today I'm going to talk about Operation Condor. Cheers. In my opinion, a historical understanding of Operation Condor is essential to being a leftist. One of the biggest reasons I think this is because the existence of Operation Condor kind of shows that socialist countries don't tend to fail on their own. And most people who are anti-communist tend to use the countries affected by Operation Condor as evidence as to why communism would just never work. Countries such as Chile, Uruguay, Argentina, etc. These countries did not fail because socialism didn't work for them. They failed because socialism didn't work for the American government and for multinational corporations. Condor was a CIA-backed operation. Its purpose was to repress and overthrow leftist governments and ideologies within the global south. It's estimated that thousands of leftists were murdered by the CIA and CIA-backed death squads, and corporation-backed death squads. Socialism in the global south didn't fail because communism is bad. It failed because our government knew it would be bad for them.
What's something that's clearly a scam, but Americans have been conditioned to believe is normal?
The doctrine of hell. You know, fire, brimstone, burning for all eternity, being tortured by Satan. The biblical references to hell in the Bible, as American Christians know it, are threefold. 1, Sheol, a place of holding, a holding place waiting for judgment. 2, Hades, which is borrowing from the Greek conceptions of the underworld. And 3, the word commonly translated to hell in the New Testament is actually Gehenna. Gehenna was the city dump outside of Jerusalem where they burned trash. It was symbolically a place of national judgment, a place where God would hold Israel accountable for not having justice in their society. When the Bible was translated into English in the Middle Ages, translators didn't think English-speaking people would know where Gehenna was, so they used the word hell, which just meant to cover, like farmers would hell their potatoes in the winter. So yes, the doctrine of hell is a scam, and is used to terrify and control people into submission. What I'm about to say about the book of Revelation, I hope will set you free. The author of the book of Revelation, John, on the Isle of Patmos, was in exile, so he was under political surveillance and couldn't write whatever he wanted without repercussions, so he chose to use a genre of writing called apocalyptic. Apocalyptic writing was really common in ancient Israel from like 200 BC. It was a way to write about current events in a kind of code that other cultures wouldn't understand. The book of Revelation is about first century events between Israel and Rome. It was never meant to be read literally, and it was never meant to be about today. Meaning that the ancient original readers of that book would not have read it literally, and neither should we. If you're going to read or study Revelations at all, it is very important to read it in its historical context, because it's not prophecy in the way you've probably been taught to believe.
Great question. Let's talk about it. We got to talk fast. So you know the phrase independent black woman? Well, that phrase has a history behind it. So during slavery, they wanted to destroy the image of the male in the female's eye. So they would take an enslaved man, rape and bullwhip him to the near point of death, and force the female spouse to watch. With her feeling alone and unprotected, they believed that this would shift her from a psychological dependent state to a frozen independent state. In this state, she would raise her kids to be reversed roles from normal society. She would raise her son to be mentally dependent but physically strong. Before, the masters were scared of the enslaved man, so they always had to be on alert. But after generations of breaking them, the enslaved man became submissive. They could use him as a tool for his strength without having to worry about him retaliating. Putting the females through this constant cycle of psychological independence, they believed they could create a cycle that would turn on its own axis forever.
All right. Episode 1 of things we should have learned in school but didn't. Buckle up. Okay, so we all know what feminism is, right? Fighting for equality of the sexes. We all know that. But we never learned what womanism is. So in the 1960s and 70s, feminism took over, right? It was a whole huge movement fighting for the equality of sexes. The problem was this movement was taken over by white women and proceeded to ignore women of color, right? So that's when author and activist Alice Walker, The Color Purple, that's her, coined the term womanism. So a womanist is basically a feminist who is fighting for the equality of the sexes, but more specifically, equality of sexes throughout no matter your race, sexual orientation, or class. But because the movement was focused toward people of color, we didn't learn about it. We did learn about Susan B. Anthony. And guess what? She didn't like black people. You know who's the black people? Black women. So yeah, there's that.
Black stereotypes and what they're grounded in. Part 12. The turning black characters into animals trope. This isn't really a stereotype, it's more of a movie trope that we see in cinema over and over again. So now that Soul has been released on Disney, I think it's a very important time to talk about this trope in cinema. Animated studios, especially Disney, have a really bad habit of turning their black leads into animals or anthropomorphic beings of some sort. We have seen this throughout the years, and most notably in Princess and the Frog. This is the way that animated studios used to make their black protagonists seem more relatable to the white audience. In these movies, the black protagonist spends the majority of the movie as another form than their black original skin. Effectively shows that black people aren't meant to be related to and aren't meant to be seen as princesses or superheroes or anything.
What's good, y'all? It's Mills Love J. To all my new followers or anyone seeing this on their For You page, I think it's clear that I do not make hair content. I talk about social trends and anthropological phenomenons, so I'm going to use some of this time to talk about some. Let's talk about how the feminist movement unproportionately panders and benefits white women over women of color. See, as the feminist movement has gradually started to close the wage gap between white women and their male counterparts in the workforce, we see a big educational push for more white girls in STEM programs, and we also see white women being accepted to male-dominated colleges at a rate we've never seen before. The problem arises when we realize that those same benefits just don't manifest themselves and aren't true for women of color communities. White women are the largest beneficiaries of affirmative action, while black women are the smallest, which is kind of crazy to think about given that they purposely handpick women of color to be at the forefront of their movement, yet it's those same women of color that aren't benefiting from it. It's like they want black women to be included in their story of oppression, but then actively exclude them from their steps to progression. Not to mention that white women have used their role in the patriarchy to further oppress people of color. Emmett Till ring a bell? Jay, that's way too long ago. Okay, how about Christian Cooper? That was this year. White women have been given the narrative that they are weak and vulnerable by white men. Turn around and use that narrative to get black people killed or incarcerated.
Black stereotypes and what they're grounded in. Part 9. Black people don't know how to talk. Or African American Vernacular English. African American Vernacular English, or AAVE, or Ebonics, is just the dialect that African Americans stereotypically use. The origins of AAVE is slavery. Big surprise. AAVE, or Ebonics, uses a bunch of different dialects, uses a lot of rural Southern American English, and then also uses a lot of Gullah language. The common misconception about Ebonics is that it's lazy, sloppy, or uneducated. However, it is found that, like every other dialect and every other language, it has very logical grammar structures and verbal structures. So Ebonics, or AAVE, is a very valid intellectual language to speak.
Welcome to another episode of Getting People to Shut Up Really Fast. Climate change doesn't exist. Oh, so you don't believe in science. It's not science. It snowed outside my house literally yesterday. That aside, what do you make of climate refugees then? What? Climate change refugees? Yeah, the millions and millions of people who have been permanently and forcibly displaced from their homes due to the catastrophes that climate change has caused. I mean, like, the climate's always changed. No, but in 2017 alone, nearly 70 million people were forcibly displaced, more than at any point in human history, so what else can you use to make sense of that? Like, numbers don't lie, babe.
Black stereotypes and what they're grounded in. Part 11. Black-sounding names. So the origin of stereotypically black-sounding names comes from slavery, essentially. So when the Africans were brought over to the Americas, their names were changed either from ignorance, laziness, or just not caring from the slave traders. Oftentimes in ledgers or receipts, you would see the tribe names be westernized. So you'd get someone from the Andoni tribe, and that would be changed to Anthony, or from the Beke tribe, and that would be changed to Becky. In the 60s, with the civil rights era, you saw the rise of black people giving themselves their own names to kind of erase their slave name. A lot of them had influences from Islam. This topic is a bit expansive, so I'm going to make a follow-up video right now. Okay, so this is going to be that follow-up video I talked about in my previous video, so black stereotypes and what they're grounded in, part 11B, essentially. So in the South, with the rise of the Creole language, especially in Louisiana, you would get names that had a lot of French influences. We use a lot of the la, or do sounding prefixes and add them to the name. So they would take stereotypically French sounding names like Andre, and you would add those prefixes together, and there you go, you get DeAndre. This style of naming can also be used with non-French sounding names like Lawanda, Lysandra, XYZ, and the list goes on. And we perceive those names as blacker than everything else because the white civilization villainized that and said it was uncultured and uncouth.
Throw away the word privilege. If we're talking about what's happening right now, throw that word away. This is white supremacy. White supremacy.
Because I do not
think that most of you understand the seriousness of what is going on in the Capitol currently right now. This is not your run-of-the-mill, I'm angry so I'm going to protest, peaceful protester. These people have breached our Capitol and they have breached national security. People have died at their hands. They've breached and discovered information that you need a clearance to discover. They are actively trying to take control of the Capitol. They are trying to coup. They are trying to stage a coup right now. Literally, the only reason being that a Biden win is set to be secured tomorrow. Take a long, hard look at it. This is what white privilege looks like for everyone denying it, and you can deny it no further. Because you know for a fact that if those bodies were brown and black, the death toll would have been in the thousands. Well, they sent in the national police. They are not sending in the riot police because they don't want to deal with this violently. However, when it came to black and brown bodies peacefully protesting, they had no problem using military-grade weapons on us. This is white supremacy at its finest. This is the state of our nation. I never thought I'd live through this, but here I am, and it's crazy.
To live on a First Nations reservation. That's what we drink. That's what the government says is good for us. Mr. Trudeau, is this good enough?
Have y'all heard about the election in Uganda? The basics of it all is that the current president has been running the country for 35 years. And the people are tired of him because he's basically a dictator. Bobby Wine is the first hope for change. Bobby is young, fairly left-leaning, and he's the first genuine thing that the young people of Uganda have been able to look forward to. The current president, Museveni, has been, president for 35 years, and the people are tired of him. But Uganda lost their internet because the president didn't want people to know about this. Check it out on Twitter. #UgandaDecides.
Once you go to hell, there is no second chance. You're not going to get any rest. I bet if someone in hell can just tell you one thing right now at this moment, they would say turn to God. Let me tell you this. What if you were to put your hand on a stove, maximum hot, and put your hand there for 10 seconds? Just 10 seconds. How bad is that gonna hurt? Imagine that, but hotter, and all over your body without being able to escape. That's just like fire in hell. That's not the only bad thing. Demons are gonna torture you. They're gonna stab you constantly. They're gonna whip you constantly. They are constantly gonna rape you. And there's constant screaming. Turn to God while you still can.
And I don't give a damn. I don't give a damn. I don't give a damn. I don't really. Tell me what has become of my life. I have a wife and 2 children who love me. I am the victim of police brutality. No, I'm tired of being the victim of hate. You're ripping me of my pride.
I am so cool. Round of applause for me. I'm just amazing.
Black people had to fight for civil rights. They got to have their thing. And gay people had to fight for civil rights. They got to have their thing too. And then women had to fight for equal rights. They got to have their thing. Well, as a straight, white, often fat male in this country who's never had anything taken away from him and never really had his existence in this country threatened, I want to have a thing. I want to have a cause. I don't really have a cause, but I want a cause. Because for me, it's really hard watching people get theirs when I've always had mine. I want to have a cause. I want something to get mad about. Yeah.
This is Centoya Brown. For those who don't know, she comes from a really rough upbringing of child neglect and abuse. At the age of 16, a child, she was being sexually solicited by an older man, ended up having to kill him in self-defense. This child was then given a life sentence. After 15 years, she was granted clemency. Thank God, because that girl did not deserve to be in prison whatsoever. Now meet Zephaniah Trevino. Only at the age of 17, a child, she was sexually being trafficked. She was being forced to do sexual acts on older men. The man forcing her to do it ended up pulling the trigger on one of his clients. This young girl is facing capital murder charges. This should infuriate you. This is a failure on so many different levels. She's the victim. She's the victim. Petitions and links will be in my link tree.
Small waist, pretty face with a big... Oh, so it's small. Like this? Smaller? Like... Oh. That's so unfortunate. All of my ex-boyfriends had that problem too. Oh, get well soon.
But